Hi, Tribe. I'm here with Corey. He's a travel nurse recruiter, and he's going to answer all of our questions about travel nursing and what that looks like and everything that you guys have already submitted. So I'm glad you're here. And I actually got to know Corey. He was my travel recruiter. I went to another person before him, and seriously, I was like, I can't do this. I can't be a traveler. This person is driving me bonkers. And then someone said, try my recruiter. His name's Corey. He's awesome. So I did, and I was good with that ever since. He is a great recruiter. So I thought I would let you guys hear what he has to say and learn from him. So hi, Corey.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here today. Look forward to speaking with you.
Yeah, so I'm just going to go down the list of questions that you guys submitted, and Corey will answer them. If you have additional questions that come up during the broadcast, just put them in the comments, and I will ask Corey as the time is appropriate. And if you aren't able to view this live, or if you have questions after the broadcast is over, just put your comments in, the questions in the comments, and I will also put Corey's contact information there for you so that you can submit those directly to him. All right, so Corey, how long have you been a travel recruiter?
I have been a recruiter for a little over 14 years. I've been here at RTG Medical for just over 13. I started here in March of 2005. So quite some time in this industry. We see a lot of turnover amongst companies, so you don't see a lot of tenure amongst recruiters, but RTG's been a good company to work for, and so I've been fortunate to be here as long as I have. So.
Awesome. That's great. And what did you do prior that prepared you for being a recruiter?
Well, I don't know if there was anything that could have prepared me necessarily. Prior to this, my wife and I actually owned a children's fitness center for a few years, and that was right out of college. So I jumped right into owning my own business. That was prior to starting a family, so we had some transition time during that, and kind of fell into this. Friend of a friend introduced me to it, and so I actually worked for another company for about a year prior to coming here to RTG. So wasn't really anything necessarily that led me to recruiting. It was kind of something I just kind of stumbled into. So I don't know that I was necessarily prepared for it, but definitely running my own business, some aspects of that do carry over to, the customer service and working with people closely, which is one of the parts that I enjoy the most, is just the relationship aspect of it. So
awesome. Nicole's here. I know you know her, Nicole Rorig. She's here listening. And then we've got a couple of new faces too. So they're excited to hear what you have to say. So is this a good place for a new grad to start? If not, elaborate, please.
Good question. Travel nursing really is not probably the best place for a new grad to start, especially in the nursing side of things. We do have a few areas where they may consider a new grad in physical therapy or occupational therapy, some places like that. But on the nursing side of things, generally our clients are looking for somebody who has a minimum of a year, and a lot of them actually look for 2 years. So kind of when we get to that year mark is kind of where we start actually looking at it as an option. But it's never too early to start to pursue it, because even as a new grad, getting to understand, what travel nursing is and kind of what the experience is about and learning about the aspects of it is always a good thing to kind of get the pieces in place and that knowledge in place prior to, actually being ready to go. So.
Okay. So what can make a nurse more marketable for travel nursing?
I would say the number one thing that I tell everybody is the more flexible that you can be as a nurse, the better your success rate will be. And when I say flexible, that comes regarding shifts. What shifts are you willing to work, locations that you're willing to travel to, what types of facilities you're willing to work in. The more flexible that you can be from that aspect of things, the greater our success rate is. And that's just because from our client side of things, they're trying to fill an opening, a hole in their schedule, whether it became about because of a medical leave or they're just understaffed, whatever the reason is, they're trying to plug somebody in to fill that hole. And so the more flexible that you can be to accommodate the clients and what they're looking for, we see more success from that standpoint. So I would say that's the number one thing. Adaptability is another thing. As you go into different facilities and things like that, there's always new challenges and things that come up, learning new systems and the way that, different clients do things, and being able to adapt to that is important. So those are probably two of the number one things that would definitely help you be successful. So.
Okay. Does that vary on specialty? Like how much experience that you need in order to go into the travel industry? Does ICU want more experience than general med surg or something of that aspect?
Yeah, I mean, some of our higher specialty areas, maybe like a cath lab or interventional radiology, some of those areas might look for a few more than even 2 years. But generally in ICU, ER, OR, most of those 2 years and some a year, will be acceptable. As you have more experience, there are, some other benefits that might come along with that. Some of the places will pay a little bit more for more experience. And obviously, the more experience you have, you're probably going to be considered maybe earlier than somebody who has 2 years, that type of thing. So. Okay.
And a lot of places, like the bigger facilities, don't take first-time travelers. How do you recommend a first-time traveler go about getting in to the door?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we do have a lot of clients that they do want that travel experience. And, when you're somebody who's trying to get into the industry, you kind of question, well, how am I supposed to get this done if that's the expectation? So it's just one of the scenarios where we have to just find somebody that's willing to consider you and get that first assignment under the belt. Some of those facilities that have that as a policy, there's just not an option to get in there without actually having some experience. So we try to look for those areas where we can find a fit and get that first assignment or first couple assignments completed, and then we can start looking at some of those places that have those requirements of having that experience and that type of thing. It's not to say that if we have somebody who has, maybe 5 or 10 years of experience, they've got a lot of experience in an area. It's not to say that we can't approach that client and say, hey, we understand that your requirement is that you have travel experience, but here's what we have. We have an individual who has extensive experience in this area, and we can do the best as recruiters to try to market you to that facility. So It's not always something that's just draw a line in the sand and there's no way around it. It's our responsibility from our end to do everything that we can to help succeed in the industry. So we got to go out of our way sometimes to try to make that happen.
Yeah, I remember actually with my first travel assignment, I really wanted this big children's hospital and they didn't take first-time travelers. And you said, well, I can put you in the same city that you want to be in, but in a smaller PICU, and they will take you. And as much as my non-flexible self didn't want to do what you were suggesting, I went with it, and it was a phenomenal experience. So I was really glad that I took your advice and went ahead and went with the smaller PICU, because it was a great way for me to adjust to the travel life. And it was a really nice experience overall. The staff was great and everything else. But I love that. I think the next question you kind of already answered, but you may have something else you want to add in. It says, what are the characteristics that make a nurse successful traveling? You mentioned flexibility and adaptability. Anything else?
Yeah, I think maybe a couple other things to add to that is just being personable. Both from the standpoint of going into a facility, obviously you have to be introduced into their systems and their policies and things like that, and being able to be approachable and personal and professional as you go into these different environments and meet new people. Obviously, that's an important thing when it comes to patient care at the same time. So I think that's another thing. And I think probably being willing to take some lumps along the way, that maybe fits into flexibility, but this is an ever-changing industry, and the expectations and the requirements that are are being added to the healthcare industry all the time. We have to pass those along, unfortunately, to our employees. And so we sometimes have to ask for things that maybe seem unreasonable at times or a lot of work at times, but it's coming from our clients. And so just being able to roll with the punches at times, because sometimes you run into some bumps along the road, whether it's compliance or a delayed start because we didn't get something in from a compliance standpoint, or scheduling difficulties, things like that. Just being able to deal with bumps along the road in a professional way, and be able to move on from that standpoint.
Yeah, because there's a lot of moving parts within the travel industry. You're a piece of it, and then your recruiter's a piece of it, and the client, the hospital is a piece of it, and you're not always dealing with that same person there at the hospital. So you can get some misinformation, and then it just trickles down. But for the most part, I felt like you guys did a really good job making sure that I knew exactly what you needed from me so that it all went relatively smoothly.
Yeah, for us as a company, one of the major things that we try to make sure of is that our communication lines are short. When you work with somebody in our company, as far as a recruiter, that's the individual you work with. We don't have a department where we're going to pass you off to housing, or we're going to pass you off to insurance, or pass you off to different areas. And the reason for that is because obviously the longer you make those communication lines, the greater the chance is something's going to get dropped along the way. And the same thing when it comes to working with our clients, we want to keep those communication lines short, and never going to promise that, we're never going to have a mistake or a bump's not going to come up along the way. But communication is the key. When that happens, communicate to the individuals involved what's going on, why this happened, and what we're doing to resolve it.
Sure. We had a question come through from Sean. Does your company dictate pay, or does the facility dictate what they're going to pay?
That primarily starts with the facility. When we set up a contract with the client, we, at that point in time, either negotiate or establish a rate that they propose to us. There's not a lot of negotiation necessarily that goes on when it comes to rates, but once that rate is established with the client, then that's what's going to determine primarily what we're able to pay anyone that we're sending them. And those rates vary just depending on the client. It's possible to have, two facilities 10 miles apart, and the bill rate is what we call it. So basically that's what we bill the client per hour to send somebody there to work. Those bill rates can be $10 an hour difference, with two facilities 10 miles apart. So that's the primary driving factor. There are some other things that influence a total pay package. One of the things I mentioned before was experience. There's some, different pieces along the road that can affect that, but the primary thing is going to be what's that bill rate that we're able to bill the client. So.
Okay. Another question from Robin. Does the travel nurse pay for the certain color of scrubs that is required for assignments?
When it comes to scrubs, that's something that as a company, we handle that on a case-to-case basis. If it's a situation where I have a nurse who's, going to a hospital and they've got an odd scrub color requirement, they've got to go out and get a whole new set of scrubs. Generally, I'll tell them, send me the receipt and I will do everything that I can to get that reimbursed to you. And I would say 9 out of 10 times that happens. We don't have a set policy as a company to say we will reimburse for every pair of scrubs that, you send us a receipt for. And that the reason for that is we have to be careful of what we're being taken advantage of at times, from that standpoint. So we handle that on a case-to-case basis. I don't know that there's a standard in the travel industry on that either. But we kind of see it as if it's something that's required for you and your assignment, then that's generally something we're going to reimburse you for.
Okay. So what do your nurses love most about being a traveler?
Boy, there's a lot of benefits to being a traveler. I would say, probably some of the top ones that I hear is just being able to travel and see the country, and not being committed to a particular place for a long-term time frame. Not having to get involved with the politics of a facility, and in a short amount of time, 3 months, whether that's 8 weeks, 13 weeks, whatever it is that the length of the assignment is, being able to move on if you don't like it, and being able to stay longer if you do. So the travel part of it, I think, as I mentioned, kind of the being able to remain outside of the politics of some of the facilities and things like that. And then just getting to learn new things at each facility you go to, because everyone does things a little bit differently. And you might learn some new things that you like. You might see some things you don't like. You may be able to provide some, things to the facility that to benefit from them because of your experience. So those are probably two of the top things. Financially, money's probably, another piece of it. Travel generally plays quite a bit more than what a permanent position does. So that's another thing that people generally will come to travel for too. So.
All right. Someone asked, can I travel with my family? And I can actually answer that. I traveled with my family. Cory's probably going to have more to add to that, but I traveled with my family and it was amazing, but it just depends on the circumstances, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's really absolutely up to you. We as a company, we're not going to restrict you from traveling with a family or a friend or a significant other, whatever that may be. That's up to you. There's a little bit more involved in the logistics maybe around it. If we're providing the housing, obviously if you have a family involved, there's some things that we're going to have to do differently there. And just for you individually, managing that, if you're a night nurse, managing your family during the day. But obviously if it's something that you feel comfortable with and want to do, there isn't anyone that's going to say you can't from that standpoint. So.
What do your nurses say is the hardest part about being a traveler?
I would say probably just the, moving around frequently, not necessarily knowing where I'm going next. In the travel industry, as I mentioned, most of our assignments are going to be a standard of 13 weeks. Usually we see some less, we see some more. And when it comes to finding that next position, if you're not going to stay, we're not always able to get that done, 6 or 8 weeks in advance. The travel industry generally turns over somewhere in the 4 weeks or less that they're looking for somebody to start. So being able to trust the process and that, I will find something, I will be employed, having that patience and being able to deal with that process, I think is probably the most difficult thing for people. Me personally, I don't think I could do it. I'm the type that I got to know, in advance. I'm a planner, those things. So it's definitely not for everyone. But I think that as people get into the process a little bit longer and see how things work, that kind of starts to fade away a little bit more. And as recruiters, it's our responsibility to do what we can to ease that anxiety, our experience and knowing what we have dealt with over the years and, passing that along to you to help with that process. So. Yes,
I myself am like a planner probably to a fault, and I really struggled with that, but you really helped me as I ended my first contract and we weren't going to renew at that facility, knowing that I wasn't going to know 5 weeks in advance when that's what I really wanted. But I found out, I think, the week before my next travel assignment, and that was so anxiety inducing for me. But then, as you said, I got more comfortable as time went on. So yes, it does. And I know a lot of nurses actually that are ICU nurses as well. And ICU nurses tend to be very controlling. And we all of us, it was like, oh my gosh, what's my next assignment? And you didn't know, but knowing that you could trust a recruiter to put all those puzzle pieces together, it was good. It was a good changing for me and learning to trust someone else.
Yeah, you definitely have to develop some patience along with it.
Yeah. It might just change you for the better, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so how easy or difficult is it to learn each new computer system at each assignment?
I can't probably personally speak to that because I'm not a nurse myself, and I have not been in that type of a situation as far as getting to learn a new computer system maybe every few months. But I think that's going to depend on the individual and how well they do with technology in a sense. Mm-hmm. Maybe whether or not you've had experience with that system in the past, whether you've had any sort of computer charting experience in the past. All of those factors are going to kind of play into that process. And also probably how the facility handles the orientation. Is it a extensive orientation where they give you the time to learn that system? Is it maybe going to be a shorter orientation where you don't have as much time? Because that really varies amongst facilities. They orientate in different ways. Some will offer an over and above orientation for their travelers, and some will, one day and here you go type of thing. So I think it's going to just depend on that scenario and what all the factors are that are involved in picking that system up. But, we'll try to do everything that we can to prepare you in advance for that so that it is as smooth of a process as it can be.
Mm-hmm. And I went to several different facilities, and once you learn, there's like 4 different charting systems. Once you've been to a facility with each of those systems, you're pretty good. And, it's like there's that little learning curve, but you always work with the team and you ask questions. Oh, where do I find the x-rays again? And they show you, and it's no big deal. So I think it's just how comfortable are you with computers, because that, I think, plays into the whole thing. But I personally didn't have a huge issue with learning the new systems. And some of the systems, like, one would have Cerner, and Cerner is a little bit different depending on what variation you've got, where your hospital's at. But overall, it was pretty much the same. So I didn't think it was that big of a deal. Oh, and that's something you can ask in your interview process too, right, Cory? You can just ask whoever you're interviewing with at the facility, hey, how long is your computer orientation?
Yeah, absolutely. The more questions that you can ask in that interview process, so you know what you're getting into, what to expect, definitely. And as you mentioned, ask questions. Being assertive is an important thing. When you go into the facility and something isn't clear, ask the question, clarify it. Don't assume that it's going to get resolved. So.
Mm-hmm. Do some nurses work as recruiters in your office?
I don't know off the top of my head if we have an actual nurse in the office. I don't think we do, that I can think of. We've got about, I think we're at about 40 recruiters, somewhere in there. We have some that have worked as maybe CNAs or LPNs in the past. I don't think we have anybody on staff currently that's a registered nurse that's currently working still on the side maybe. I can't think of anyone off the top of my head. Okay.
Let's see. What are the various assignment lengths, and is that flexible?
Yeah, I kind of touched on that a little bit previously. They kind of range. Our standard in the industry is 13 weeks, so 3 months. But we see shorter, we see longer. And it is flexible in a sense from the standpoint that you can be looking for, let's just say, an 8-week assignment, and we can be flexible from the standpoint of what facility you're willing to go to find that. Mm-hmm. We're not the ones as a company that determine the length of that assignment. It's going to be what the client's need is. But even if they post an assignment for 13 weeks and maybe you only have 8 weeks available, it's not to say we can't go ask them if they would be willing to consider an 8-week assignment. So there's definitely flexibility there. But we do see a range. We don't see a lot of, long-term 1 or 2 year contracts, things like that. Generally, it's going to be, 13. We might see 26, something like that.
Okay. And then along with that, when I was renewing, like if I was at the end of my 13-week contract and say I had 3 weeks to extend, sometimes they would do that as well. And that's just based on the facility, right?
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to an extension, that's a little bit different from a flexibility standpoint, because now they've already have somebody in-house that they've trained. They don't have to do any additional training, and it's much easier and also more cost-effective to not have to bring someone in new and go through that process. So they tend to be a bit more flexible when it comes to that, to where, maybe they'll do 3 weeks or 8 weeks or 6 weeks, whatever it may be.
Okay. And then what kind of housing is offered?
Housing, it just really depends on the location that you're going to. The primary benefit that we offer when it comes to that is we'll tell you that we're going to offer you fully furnished private housing. Now, in what form that comes in just really depends on where you're going, what the budget is, what's available. So there's kind of a lot of factors that play into that. But the way that we handle it as a company, actually each of our recruiters actually handles their own housing. We believe that's the best way because you are fully involved then in your traveler's experience and exactly where they're going, rather than handing it off to a housing department that basically just goes out and finds something and says, okay, here's what we found, here's where they're staying. So that's how we handle it. And that may come in the form of a fully furnished apartment. That's already a corporate apartment that was already furnished. It may come in the form of an apartment we have to rent and then furnish ourselves. It could be an extended stay, which is kind of a cross between a hotel and an apartment. There's different forms that it can come in. But the one thing I can say is when we work with our travelers on housing, we work hand in hand in that. I don't just set up the housing and then call my traveler and say, okay, here's where you're staying, here's the address, go check in. I will be speaking with you throughout that process about what we're seeing, what we're finding, what's the cost, what we're not seeing, things like that. So,
and I remember when my first travel contract, you guys found my housing. I had a dog that was a husky and it was tricky, and you still found my housing. And so that was super helpful. And then later when I had my family with me, I took the stipend so that I could work with that. Can you give them a little bit of information about how that works?
Yeah, so the difference between us providing housing, the other option is a housing stipend, as Chelsea mentioned, and that is a allowance per day that the government basically allows us to give. There are some qualifying factors for that, and the one primary thing is that you maintain a tax home. And a tax home basically is that you incur cost for housing outside of the housing that you're going to have for your assignment or your employment. So whether you own a home, you rent a room, whatever that may be, you have to incur some cost and maintain that home while you're out on assignment. And if that is maintained, then we are able to give you what we call a tax-free housing stipend and provide money to you that is designated by county across the country, basically, and it's so much per day. So that might turn into being $1,000 a week. It could be $500 a week. It depends on the area of the country that you're traveling to. That money is provided to you to use toward your housing.
Right. So if the cost of living in Seattle, Washington is much higher than Albuquerque, New Mexico. So your housing stipend is going to be much greater in Seattle, Washington than it is in Albuquerque, New Mexico, right? That's what you're saying? Correct.
Yep. It is designated per county, and the factors that drive that are going to be cost of living and, different things like that. So that amount per day will vary depending on the area that you're going to.
Okay, a question came in. There's a minimum number of miles that one has to commute to qualify as a traveler, right? I heard that the nurse who travels from Albuquerque to Santa Fe, which is here in New Mexico, it's in the kind of neighboring cities, but qualified because it's over 60 miles or something, is what she says.
Okay. There's actually not a standard rule written that says 50 miles, 60 miles, whatever it may be. The IRS says that it has to be an unreasonable commute. So it's kind of a gray area because they don't tell us exactly what that means. What's unreasonable mean? So for us as a company, we've set a standard within our company that says it has to be outside of 50 miles to qualify as a traveler. And then if it's not outside of 50 miles, but we believe it to be an unreasonable commute, we'll look at that on an individual basis. So for instance, if I'm traveling 25 or 30 miles inside the city of Los Angeles, that may be an unreasonable commute. Whereas 25 to 30 miles, in New Mexico between Santa Fe and Albuquerque is not. That's something you could reasonably commute on a daily basis. So that's kind of a misconception out there in the industry that there is an actual written rule or law that says 50 miles. Unfortunately, it would be easier if it was written that way, but it's not. So it's based upon an unreasonable commute, and you'll see between different companies like ourselves that that's handled a little bit differently.
Yeah.
But primarily, you'll probably see kind of the principle out there is that 50 mile or somewhere in there that companies are going to kind of follow.
Okay. Traveltax.com is where I answered all of my those kinds of questions, like the IRS type questions. They were super helpful. Their website Q&A page is phenomenal. So I'll put that in the comments later. So someone says, so if I haul my fifth wheel, I can pocket the housing allowance? Question mark.
If you have a permanent tax home, that is correct. The problem is you can't just go buy an RV or fifth wheel and take off and have no other cost anywhere else, because now you are actually just traveling in your home. So there has to be, again, a permanent tax home somewhere else for you to be able to receive the housing stipend tax-free. So
at that point, their housing allowance would just be taxed, right, as part of their income?
Correct. So it's not that you lose the money of the housing stipend or the money that we would provide you if we were setting up your housing. It's not that you lose that. It's still going to be there. It's just going to be taxed because you're not maintaining a tax home. The government sees that as, okay, this individual's maintaining a home, and now they have to incur more cost for employment. So that's where they're giving you the tax break, because they don't want you to be burdened twice, basically, on your housing. So
great.
As you mentioned, you mentioned travel tax. They're actually located here in Nebraska, where we're located. In Norfolk is where Joseph Smith is, who handles travel tax. He's been in our office several times and has met with us, because there's so much to understand from our side of the travel industry and how all of that works, to be able to be educated and at least give some of this information. But as you said, I would refer you to them for any of those specific travel tax questions, because they're very educated and they have dealt
You
with
may have actually referred me to them, and that's how I found them. I would almost guarantee you that's exactly how that happened.
Yeah.
And they actually do a lot of free seminars for travelers, and they came to Albuquerque, New Mexico one time. So they're not just in the big cities. They go across the country, and I don't know that they still do that, but they do seminars all the time, and they're free. You just come and learn, and it's really cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question. What are the benefits? What kind of benefits do you offer, I think is what they're asking.
Yeah, benefits that we offer as a company, I'll speak specific to us first, is that we offer housing as an option. We can offer a rental car if that is something that's needed. We offer insurance. I will kind of speak generically in insurance because it changes every year. When it comes to that, we have right now this year, we have medical, dental, life, and vision that we offer. We reevaluate every year. Unfortunately, the travel industry is not in the greatest light when it comes to insurance companies, because they're looking for consistent guaranteed premiums, and we're turning people over on a frequent basis. So we're always trying to find better deals and better insurance to be able to offer. But we will always have something at least to offer from that standpoint. We also offer a 401k. That you're vested in immediately. If you come on with us, if you put in 5%, we'll match up to 4% on the 401k. What else? Reimbursement for certifications that are required for assignments. We will reimburse for CEUs at times, depending on kind of on a case-to-case basis, as the scrubs, same type of thing. And those are probably the consistent benefits. There are other things that may come along with an assignment. Sometimes there's a completion bonus that's offered. Sometimes there is a sign-on bonus that could be offered. Don't see a lot of those these days, but those are other things that you may come across along the way.
Someone asked if you do international travel.
We currently do not do any international travel, other than not really international, but we do some staffing in the Virgin Islands. Has probably been the furthest that we've gone, but we don't do anything international right now.
Do you have an agency you recommend for international travel?
To be honest with you, I don't off the top of my head. It's not been an area that I've gotten much into. I know they're out there, but I'm not real educated on.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. So who does the traveler report to?
At the facility, it just depends on what their policies are there. I mean, generally you'll have a manager or director that you'll report to. Some places you might report to the staffing office. It's really just going to depend on the facility and how their organization is set up from that standpoint. But that information is provided upon you reporting. We're going to give you information as far as where you're going to report to and who you're going to report to. And then in orientation, you would find out who your direct supervisor is and how that chain of command kind of flows.
Okay. How do I get from assignment to assignment?
Travel is going to be dependent upon you. We recommend if you can take your own vehicle, that's going to be the most cost-effective way to handle it. We can offer a rental car, but as that cost is incurred, that will come out of your total pay package when it comes to a rental car. So if you're going to fly, that's an option also. We can reimburse for a flight or maybe take care of the cost of the flight depending on the situation. But obviously in those cases, a lot of times you're going to need a rental car then once you arrive. So I would say 90%, probably higher than 90% of our travelers travel in their own vehicle. And then we reimburse you for mileage to and from the assignment.
Okay. And it's not always the full travel cost, but if I as the traveler want you to reimburse me for my full travel cost, then that just comes out of the full package. So essentially my hourly wage goes down some or something to that effect, right?
Correct. Yeah. When we look at pay packages for travel, kind of the easiest way to look at it is you have a pie or a pizza, and we can cut that pizza up into 10 pieces, or we can cut it up into, as little as one and just pay you at a flat hourly rate. Mm-hmm. So the more pieces that we add to that pie, the more that things get split up, but the total package stays the same. So as Chelsea's saying, if I pay you $2,000 to travel from New York to California, your hourly rate's going to be a little bit less to accommodate that $2,000 because mm-hmm. the rate that we bill the facility does not change. Whether you're coming from New York to California or you're coming from Northern California to Southern California, they don't consider that. They just allow us to bill them a flat rate. So we have to fit everything in under that. Basically.
Okay. And then can you take time off during an assignment or between assignments?
Yeah, when it comes to time off, we definitely can request that. It is going to be up to the facility whether they approve it or not. But there's absolutely nothing saying that we can't submit for, specific time off. I've seen situations where maybe somebody gets 2 weeks off. Somebody, might get a month off at times. Is probably not very common, but we all the time we're requesting time off, and the facilities can generally accommodate it depending on the how long that time is.
Yeah, I found personally in my travel experience that people were super flexible. If you really wanted Christmas Eve off and you put that in your contract, then if they agreed to it, then you have that fancy contract in your hand saying, hey, we both signed this and you said I got Christmas Eve off. I never had any trouble getting the dates off that I put in my contract. But if you're just willy-nilly about it and not a planner, then it might be more of an issue, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's something that we want to make sure is addressed up front. We never want to go into the assignment thinking, oh, I'm just going to ask for this time when I get there and find out that's not going to happen. So right. I generally will always coach my employees that if you have time off that is a necessity, that's what I need to know up front. We'll submit that up front. If you have some time off that you would like to have, maybe my birthday, whatever it may be, I would suggest that you talk to them about that when you get there versus listing all of that as a necessity, because the more that you add as far as requirements for them to meet, it's just more hurdles for them to make it work. But as you said, generally, if you have some preferences, when you get there and get to know people, they're generally flexible, to work with you for that time. So.
Okay. And then the last question I have on here is, what is per diem travel?
Per diem is a kind of another piece of the housing stipend. So there's actually two categories. Per diem means per day is what it means. You might hear that term used when it comes to agency nursing. Sometimes they call it per diem, and it's just meeting people or using people on a per day basis. So when it comes to the tax-free monies that the government provides, those are broken up into two categories: housing or lodging, and then the miscellaneous and incidentals. And sometimes both of those just get lumped in under the term of per diem. So if that's what we're referring to, that's an amount or an allowance per day that the government allows us to provide to our employees in the category of lodging, and then also the category called miscellaneous and incidentals, which that's going to cover your food, your clothing, your gas, things that are needed for an assignment. So.
Okay, awesome. Well, if people have further comments or questions, Cory's not on Facebook. So Cory, what's the best way for them to contact you?
Either by email or by phone. And Chelsea, you can welcome to give that information out.
Will do.
Cell phone or office phone, either one are acceptable. And absolutely would love to answer any further questions anybody might come up with following this or in the future. So. All
right, Cory. Well, thank you for joining us. It was great to learn from you, and we'll talk again soon.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks. See ya.
See ya.